If I were to ask what was the one thing stopping you from being successful in life, what would you say? Most times we'd point to some sort of obstacle in our circumstances, a lack of money, poor job opportunities, the wrong place that we live in, or something along those lines. Our first thought is to ask, how can I change my circumstances, my bank account, my job, my church, or somebody else? But the truth is, the thing in our lives that most thwarts our progress are the obstacles inside of us. That means the most effective way to change our life is to change ourselves. When we experience internal transformation, we start to see external transformation. That's because we live our lives from our own perspective and mindset. So when we change ourselves, it's like the world around us changes too. I first learnt this when I was leading my church many years ago. I would look at my church and think, okay, well, how can I make it grow? How can I make it successful? And I would start to think about all the things. I would change the service format, improve the advertising or the programs we're delivering, make better coffee, which are all good things. But then oddly, I noticed something else. As I worked through some of my own weaknesses, my poor habit or an insecurity, as I worked through that and as I conquered that, the church would begin to grow. It was uncanny. I changed me with the help of God, and then my world changed. Well, how does that happen? Well, first of all, we need to remind ourselves of the story that we start with. Each of us is made in God's image, so valuable, so loved that God would send his son to die for us. Paul wrote to the Ephesian church that we are God's workmanship, created to do good works, which God has prepared in advance for us to do. But at the same time, we are made in God's image. We are so valued. Nothing we can do can change that. But at the same time, we're marred. We're marred by our own choices, our own sin, our selfishness, death-producing behaviours, and also the choices of others who have hurt us, the wounding that's come into our lives. And so when we come to follow Jesus, the Spirit comes to change us from the inside out. And the process, I think, looks a bit like what God said to the prophet Jeremiah many hundreds of years ago. He said to Jeremiah, I want you to go down to the potter's house and I'm going to speak to you there. So Jeremiah goes down to the potter's house and he sees a potter taking a cracked jar off the shelf and he puts it on the wheel. And Jeremiah begins to watch as the potter masterfully begins to sculpt the jar into the shape that seems best for him. He takes the water and he spins it round and round and starts to work with it masterfully to create a beautiful jar. And then God speaks to Jeremiah and he says, can I do with you what this potter does to this jar? Can I shape you? Can I mold you? The Spirit comes to shape us, to change us from inside out. And I remember experiencing that in my own life very early on. God said, I'm calling you, Tanya, to be a leader. I'm like, what do you mean by that? I've never thought of myself that way. I was shy and insecure and scared. And I remember the time God asked me to lead a church and I just didn't think I could do it. But in faith and obedience, I followed what God said. And years later, I remember having this moment, looking back on the process, looking back on the journey of believing what God said about my life and realizing I am a leader. I can do this. I am God's workmanship. And I realized that God had changed me internally, that the world around me had started to change as well, that I'd experienced the abundant life that Jesus promised. See, that's how it works for each one of us. The Spirit comes and says, I've created you for purpose. Will you allow me to shape you and mold you into the jar that I see for you? It's a calling God has for each one of us. Thanks for listening today to Everyday God Conversations. It's been fabulous to have you here. For more on having your own God conversation, why don't you come check us out on godconversations.com, and we'll see you next time.